Americans are now sharing their predictions ahead of the highly anticipated face-off between Biden and Trump. Fox News Digital asked people who they think will be the night's big winner. Take a listen.
I don't know who's going to come out as the victor. I don't know. Everyone loves Biden, though.
Hopefully Trump does well.
I think it's going to be a sandbox fight.
I think it's going to be a mess, to be quite honest.
I think Mr. Trump will do excellent. I think he'll knock him out of the ballpark.
I think it's going to go pretty heated, but I think Trump's going to win just because, I don't know. I don't have a preference, but I think that Trump's got a lot of support, at least down in the South where I'm from.
Well, I hope both of the candidates are true and answer the questions honestly.
Honestly, a lot of name calling. I'm expecting neither of them to necessarily hear out the point of the other person and not really expecting them to be respectful of their political opponent whatsoever.
Well, I think it's going to be close, but Trump's going to take it.
Last time in 2020 when we had the debates, Trump was a little bit overzealous, it seemed like. And I'd like to see if he can calm down a little bit and kind of show a little more restraint when he's up there answering questions.
I think abortion's the biggest one for me.
The economy right now, definitely.
More than anything, I would like the moderators to be more honest than the candidates, because I think we know where the candidates stand.
I want them to talk about the issues that are at hand and less about all the cultural divides that everybody's been fighting over.
Topics in regards to immigration, see where they stand on both of them. It is important to address some of the issues that have been on the news lately.
I would like to hear that blue-collar workers are going to get more not necessarily recognition, even though they should definitely have more recognition. They are the building blocks of this country. I think that pay should be the economy should go down enough to where we can actually give them effective pay.
Jobs, homeless people, how can they make that a better place,
Sure, I'm fascinated by this, and here's why. We have talked so much about the expectation for Biden. It's so low, he's going to come off as old. But not a single person we just heard mentioned age and acuity. What they did mention was the expectation that has been set for Trump, that he will be menacing and, dictatorial. That's the expectation set for Trump. And it seems like the expectation is higher for Trump. And, if he comes off calm, look, it's going to surprise a lot of people.
Then it certainly wanted, I think, demeanor and how they react and if they obey the rules, et cetera. All of those things for both candidates, I think, are going to be very important. One of the things is I always look at the Vegas odd makers to see what they're saying. And some of my favorite things I've looked at is, here's what you can bet on. Will Trump say drill, baby, drill? What is each candidate going to wear? That's very important. Sure.
Really?
Yeah.
They're guys. It's not important to me.
Yeah. Well, will Trump bring up his New York fraud trial, any legal issues in particular with closing arguments? But I think, I say focus on kitchen table issues. That's what I want to hear about. I want to hear about the economy. I want to hear about what you're going to do for the country. And also, I think geopolitics, which I mentioned earlier. I'm very interested in that. World affairs.
Emily, Hillary Clinton said that expectations for Biden are so low that for Trump, are so low that if he doesn't literally light himself on fire on Thursday evening, some will say he was downright presidential. I think she's smart to say that because some of the voters seem to have been picking up on that.
Well, and she has a history of inflammatory commentary, obviously, especially about President Trump, for example, when she said he was stalking her around the stage. So I think she will continue to set sort of a colorful expectation. What I heard from those commentaries, and perhaps it's like a Rorschach test, but what I heard was a diversity of opinion in terms of the issues that are important to people. And all of them are equally important. The economy, and one of those young people said abortion and livelihoods and homeless and safety. There's a whole host of issues. And to your point, not really anyone said something like, oh, I want to see them go at it. Americans care what their presidential potential will do for them and the security and safety of their livelihood and their lives here. So to me, I feel and hope that these guys step up to it. And by these guys, I mean the moderators. Yeah. Give Americans what they deserve.
I did love the guy who said the moderators are the ones who need to step up.
I think all the answers came across as so personal. This is what I, as a voter, want to see. And you said something very interesting about the debate prep from 2020 earlier in the show. The questions that get asked by these moderators have a particular angle, direction, and President Trump doesn't have to go with whatever that angle is. If you get ask some question about January 6th, I'd start off by saying, you want to talk about attacks on democracy? ... about how they want to lock you up, they want to bankrupt me and my family, you want to take my name off the ballot.
Yes.
You want to talk about attacks on democracy, you don't have to accept that line, that angle that they're trying to take it down.
It's
Yeah,
so
I can
true.
tell you've debated and won a few times. I like it.
It's so true what Lee's saying. I mean, if Jake Tapper thinks he could get away with 90 minutes on January 6th, he would do it. So I think when this comes up to Trump, what Trump should say is, you want to focus on one day 3 years ago. I want to focus on every single day of the last 3 years that have driven America down a hole.
Yeah.
Great line.
It really hit me with the young man at the end who was talking about blue-collar workers. And it made me think of something that we used to say during the height of the pandemic when President Trump was leading the country, that those are the people who were keeping things going. And it would be interesting to see him, if that topic were to come up, or if he were to bring up those essential workers, how they're still essential. They just can't pay their bills anymore.
Yep. Yeah. Bingo. Lots of good advice here on the couch.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.